Good evening and welcome to this briefing on an analysis of Virginia student growth percentiles for data covering 2011 through 2014. As we saw in the previous briefing, school achievement scores are highly correlated with income. In Colorado, all schools with less than 25% economically disadvantaged students had higher overall achievement scores than any school with greater than 75% disadvantaged students. However, there is virtually no correlation with student growth percentile scores. Both affluent communities, those with less than 25%, have high and low growth scores, as well as communities in poverty have high and low growth scores. The table shows various combinations of achievement and growth for Virginia school districts. Some of these actual districts have both high achievement and high growth. Districts A, B, C, and D all scored in the top 6 student growth percentile rankings for both math and reading. Some districts have rather low achievement, but high growth. Districts E, F, and G are not getting the credit they so justly deserve. These teachers and administrators are working with disadvantaged students, and they're working miracles. Even though their SOL averages are low, they're seeing remarkable growth. And based on the correlation data we saw in the previous slide, even if they never achieve super high SOL scores, they are contributing an inordinate amount of growth to their students in a disadvantaged community. And finally, District H is an example of a high-performing district with very low growth. Its SOL ranking is 30 places higher than its growth measure ranking. This difference is among the highest in all of Virginia. Typically, the administration of such a district may be focused on the wrong priorities. Without student growth percentile scores, however, it is impossible to discover districts such as these who are not serving their advantaged students very well. The public would simply see a high SOL ranking and assume everything is going very well. On this slide, you will see the names of the districts mentioned previously. Everyone is aware of the great schools in Fairfax, but folks might be surprised to learn that Prince William, whose pure pupil spending is among the lowest in Northern Virginia, has such high growth scores. And Roanoke is outstanding both in achievement and in growth. But the real credit should go to districts like Manassas City, Roanoke City, and Hampton City Schools. These educators have stepped up to the plate and are making huge differences in the lives of disadvantaged youth. Lastly, we come to a district such as York County. It has among the top achievement scores in the state, demonstrating there is outstanding human capital in its students. But the administration hasn't lived up to expectations in terms of academic growth. I imagine things will be turning upwards for York County since they recently acquired a new superintendent. I hope the district that hired York's last superintendent bothered to look at the growth scores before hiring him. Or at least the new district should consider the growth scores when they evaluate the policies that the ex-York County superintendent will propose. To better visualize the achievement versus student growth spectrum, the same districts are mapped on a scatter plot comparing achievement and growth. Let's skip back one slide. You can easily tell which ones are outstanding in every way. The districts in green in the upper right quadrant are high in both achievement and in growth. The blue districts are doing amazing work with disadvantaged kids. You can see that their SOL achievement scores are low, but they still maintain high growth. Even if their students never reach the high achievement quadrants, they are making significant differences in the lives of children and are to be highly commended. Some might even say that educators in green, blue, and black districts are being underpaid, since the value they add to their students' future incomes is enormous. And the red district has simply not lived up to the potential of its students. Its high achievement scores show that there's a lot of potential, but each year they do not achieve as much growth as similar students from around Virginia. To confirm a district's progress, we should look at their scores over time. Districts like Fairfax consistently perform well on both achievement and growth over time. You can see that from the rankings, both in the SOL as well as their student growth percentile rankings. Districts like Hampton City and Bedford County have made amazing gains. As you can see, they started in the years 2011 and 12 with high SGP rankings, or lower SGP scores, and they've proceeded to move up to the rankings each year, ending in some of the highest slots in the state. Other districts can use these districts as examples as they look to make data-driven decisions. They can use them and see what best practices they use and copy and emulate those in their own districts. Finally, York County's trend over time confirms that something was amiss in its policies. Both math and reading scores dropped over the last 3 years. Parents and citizens need growth data so they can understand when problems lie beneath the surface. Even though they started with relatively high SGP rankings in the beginning, they've since fallen off, and the reading scores are among the lowest SGP ranks in the entire state. The real credit should go to districts like Manassas City, Roanoke City, and Hampton City Schools. These educators have stepped up to the plate and are making huge differences in the lives of disadvantaged youth. Since I am from Loudoun County, I wanted to take a second and use my county scores as an example. You'll see that Loudoun's achievement scores are high, as seen by the median math SOL score. That's in the lower chart here, reflected by the orange bar. It's in the second highest group of scores when you plot them on a histogram. However, we are actually below average in student growth in mathematics, as seen by the orange column for the 46 median math SGP. We hope to see this growth move upwards in the years ahead by implementing better policies and hiring highly effective teachers in math and science. You'll see that Loudoun's reading achievement scores and its students' growth are both high on these charts. Thus, it is possible for a district to have diverging outcomes among various subject areas. So we have high achievement and growth in reading, high achievement in math, but only mediocre growth in math. Recruiting more STEM majors for math courses might be a way to improve Loudoun's overall performance by strengthening its mathematics instruction. Teacher effectiveness has been shown to be the single greatest factor in student achievement. Greater than class size, school facilities, school leadership. While 99% of teachers in Virginia were rated as effective in virtually every district, SGP scores for students span the gamut from 0 to 100%. Thus, for teachers, schools, and districts, there's also a wider variation in their evaluations based on growth measures. And it has a much greater effect than class size. The U.S. Department of Education, VDOE, and educational foundations like the Gates Foundation all urge districts to use objective growth measures in the evaluations of teachers and principals. In fact, funding via the Secondary Education Act requires that growth measures be used when available and appropriate. You'll notice on the shared G drive, we have a lot of documents from VDOE that demonstrate that they recognize that SGP scores are required to be delivered to teachers and the principals. Also, that the federal government requires teachers to be evaluated with a small component, 20%, on growth scores when the data is available and appropriate. Most districts are not downloading the data and therefore are not in compliance with these regulations. Unfortunately, our district is simply not following the rules. And if the current VDOE ESEA waiver is approved at the federal level, our growth data will be further watered down. Can we afford to allow this critical data to be hidden from the public and omitted from educator evaluations? But please note that growth measures should never be the only measure of effectiveness in an evaluation. Research suggests that growth measures should count for between 20 and 50% of overall scores. The Gates Foundation has invested in research that recommends in-person evaluations as the dominant factor in evals, objective growth measures as a significant component, and student surveys all of which have an important role to play in evaluating our educators. As we release the Virginia SGP data to the public tonight, we want to pass along disclaimers on its use. I understand this is a little boring, but we wanted to make sure that people understand the data and interpret it correctly. This data has been publicly available since VDOE released it to me on February 4th, 2015. However, the lawyers who were aware that they could request it after February 4th via a FOIA request probably didn't know what to do with it. And the tech analysts who want the data probably didn't realize FOIA allowed them to request it right away after February the 4th. I have intentionally not made this fact known because I wanted to make sure the data was fully vetted before releasing any of it to the public. And you'll see from several of the reliability tests in here that we were able to uncover some issues that have been corrected. There was the possibility that other citizens could have obtained the data and released quick and invalid analyses. However, I chose not to release the data until I was confident that all the conclusions were reliable. The Virginia Department of Education is charging me over $1,000 to write the code to produce the data from their database. However, now that it's written, anyone can request similar data from VDOE for free, since VDOE simply has to run the code. I will also be placing all of this data in an online folder tonight for others to analyze. Since there are over 6 million records, the spreadsheets limit the data that can be shown. However, I will be placing an export of my Oracle database schema that others can import for their own analysis. It includes a lot of materialized views and views that include the algorithms that were used to create the rankings. This should expedite everyone's analysis, as much of the calculations and data mappings are already done for you. Some additional points to note. Data were suppressed by VDOE when student identity could be compromised. Thus, any group with less than 10 students, for example, a third grade math class at a small school, were not provided by VDOE. The data also includes retest scores, but in all of the analysis that you will see tonight, none of these retest scores were included in my analysis for obvious reasons. Additional records were suppressed by VDOE when it was deemed they would paint an inaccurate picture of the school instructing the student. For example, if a student transferred in the middle of the year, it was unclear who taught the student versus where they tested. Those would not accurately reflect on the school performing the instruction, so they were suppressed. And we'll show that percentages to you tonight. The following points are related to the analysis I am releasing tonight, not the underlying data. Many will look solely at the overall rankings once it's released, but I encourage you to dig deeper into all the various calculations. I don't plan to review them all here tonight, but you will find the different measures very interesting. Please note that the SGP scores provided by VDOE do not have a median of 50th percent. The SGP calculation algorithm is open source, but I have not researched why the median is slightly off from the 50% mark. However, when comparing relative rankings among schools and districts, the actual median of individual student scores are not important. The relative performance is what is significant. But it's important to understand that if you see a median reading SGP of your district of 47, that is not below average. That is actually above the median of districts at 44. Likewise, a 49 math SGP is not below average. It's actually in the top half of the districts. Finally, there are additional calculations on the details tabs of the spreadsheets. And if you're interested in how a particular district or school performed at various SOL performance levels, see the group files, which start GRP _. For example, the group analysis can be used to investigate which districts did the best job at educating underperforming kids. Kids, for example, who scored a pass basic in the SOL category. I mentioned some of the other calculations that were included. SGPs or SOL scores are actually classified as different categories, and growth scores have a high growth, moderate growth, and low growth category. Those are reported down to the individual school districts. An SGP ratio calculation was generated to compare among the different growth categories. And you can see its formula on the screen here tonight. Number of high growth students minus the number of low growth students divided by their sum. Here's a chart showing graphically how much data was suppressed by VDOE. VDOE provided the following numbers in terms of records provided and those suppressed. Again, the suppression data was when we had small groups of less than 10 in which there is a very unlikely but still possible chance that you could identify an individual student's SOL score. The SGP scores, since they are completely uncorrelated with the SOLs, there's really no chance of somebody using an SGP score to find out those of a student. You'll notice that less than 6% of the records have been suppressed, and typically it's about 3% of the records in grade 3 through 8 that have been suppressed. Thus, the validity of the remaining records remain intact. And for reasons that we'll go into later, the only grades and tests that were used for calculations were grade 4 through grade 8. As you recall, not all students receive an SGP score. If the students don't have a sufficient score history, the SGP is not calculated for them. For example, in grade 3, there are no students with a score history. Therefore, it doesn't make sense to calculate a growth percentile among similar students. In addition, if they have advanced proficient SOL scores from multiple years, they do not receive an SGP score. If a student is basically getting 100%, it's very unreliable to try to track growth from the 98% SOL score to the 100th and back again. Because of the distribution of SGP scores, the end of course records, the EOC records, were not included in any of my analysis. For one, it doesn't track well with yearly student gains due to when the tests are taken. But there are simply too few records with SGP scores relative to the tests taken to make assessments from those scores. For the remaining years and tests, about 80% of the records have an SGP score. This is sufficient to make reliable assessments using the SGP scores. Finally, there was additional analysis performed on the advanced proficient scores. Since many of these don't have SGP scores, I attempted to look at the flow of students coming and going to the advanced proficient SOL status. How many students moved up into the advanced proficient when they were not there the year before? And how many students moved down from advanced proficient status down to a lower SOL category? And how do those compare relative to the number of overall students who scored advanced proficient on the SOL scores? You'll find this in the spreadsheets under the advanced proficient ADV space PROF tabs of the group files. Lastly, I wanted to discuss the median SGP scores in the data. Notice that the median SGP of math scores is about 48, while the median SGP for reading is 44. One would expect the median to be 50, and you'll see from these curves that they're both weighted a little bit to the left. I spoke to VDOE for 45 minutes to determine why the data was distributed in the above chart as it is. They offered a couple of explanations, but it's still unclear to me exactly why the distribution is what it is. Some of the explanations revolved around having multiple score histories or multiple years of score histories and it not lining up properly, so you didn't evaluate all the students in that cohort. The SGP calculation is open source, and I plan to inspect it in more detail. I have a hunch that floor functions may have been used on some percentiles, thus skewing the data, but this is purely conjecture. Floor functions are when you drop a score down to the lowest number within a range, and therefore it biases all the scores slightly lower. But overall, the relative rankings won't be affected by slightly offset medians, but it's important never to look solely at an median SGP and say, is it above or below 50? You need to understand the average of the median SGP for that group of data. The jagged nature of the curve is due to the data suppression, which, although it occurred across all percentiles, it will never be completely smooth. And one last point to make here. Tried to get in touch with VDOE over the last couple of days, but due to the snow holidays, have not been able to confirm. The data that was received had a lot of duplicate records in them. In other words, the exact same student information came across with the exact same SOL and SGP score, but it was not flagged as a retest. Sometimes there would be 4 different records with the exact same information. Obviously, this can skew the data one way or the other. In my analysis, I have removed all those duplicates. In analyzing all the duplicates I saw, I never saw any deviation between the SGP scores or the SOL scores. Therefore, I was led to the conclusion that they were indeed duplicates and should be removed. However, I have conducted analysis both with the original data set provided on February the 4th, the new data set that VDOE provided on February 11th that included some additional records that should not have been suppressed, and now with the data set from February 11th with the duplicate removed. And they're consistent across all 3 sets of records. We will work to confirm with VDOE exactly why the duplications occurred, but it won't fundamentally change any of the analysis that you will see here tonight. The records and the data are very robust. Much more information, links, and research can be found at the Twitter handle @FreeThatData. I encourage everyone to review the RAND Corporation articles on teacher effectiveness in the Gates Foundation study, which I consider the most comprehensive study performed to date. It's been a long process in my FOIA request that began back in September of 2014 to have this data made available. I believe that it's in the public interest to evaluate our schools with the best data possible, and I hope that everyone will pitch in their time and efforts so that we can get all kinds of calculations and measures and analysis performed on this data so that we can all improve our schools. I think the teachers who go out of their way to work in poor districts and work with disadvantaged kids deserve our respect and deserve our efforts to look at the true growth measures and simply looking at an SOL score and trying to see if an affluent community can score well and rating those teachers well. We owe it to both communities to have an honest evaluation of all of our kids' education. And for that, I thank you for joining us. And now all of this data will be placed online and you will be able to access it and download it.